Hello, and welcome back to the Original Medicine Podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about dry needling. Dry needling is an arena in which I feel the public is woefully underserved. And what I mean by underserved is undereducated. People are waking up to the idea that acupuncture holds a tremendous amount of healing, and it is increasingly common that you hear people say, oh yeah, I have an acupuncturist. Oh, I've been to acupuncture before, and it helped me with my fill in the blank, right? And this is great news for acupuncture as a profession, for Chinese medicine as a practice. These are generally great things. But when it comes to dry needling, a lot of people have also experienced it with varying results, just as in acupuncture. But what I find the general public does not understand is how little training goes into dry needling. So I want to make this episode focus today on what are the things you need to know about dry needling so that you can make an informed decision. There's this concept in general, not in medicine, but it's called information asymmetry. And it means that, for example, the professional in a given profession has all the information and the consumer has very little information. And I think that this is exactly what happens in the realm of acupuncture, where acupuncturists are highly trained, they know what they're doing, they understand the medicine, as in any profession, some more than others. But then the patient has very little information. And when they go to the internet to get more information, there is very little good information out there. So it's not the same as if you go to your orthopedic surgeon who tells you you have a torn ACL and you need reconstructive surgery and you're going to do this much physical therapy afterwards. And here are the statistics that indicate your recovery process. You can easily go to a million different websites, get different people's opinion. You can read research studies. This is not the case with acupuncture, and it's definitely not the case with dry needling. And I also would argue, just as an aside, that research that is being done on acupuncture is the least effective acupuncture out there. It is acupuncture that has been watered down to such an extent that it can be put into a random controlled trial. And that is not at all how Chinese medicine works. It's not how acupuncture works. And this is not something that we really want to encourage, even though that may sound strange to us in general in the Western world, where we have come to accept random controlled trials as the gold standard in evidence-based medicine. Chinese medicine practices in a very different way. It's a principle-based medicine, and the evidence is thousands of years old. So it's not that it's not legitimate, and it's not that random controlled trials aren't legitimate. It's just that the two things don't match up very well. So what I want to get into here, like I said, is I want you to understand what dry needling is itself, how it came to be, how it's practiced, and the difference in training between an acupuncturist and someone who is doing dry needling, so that you can understand truly what the risks are to your health. I find that every time I explain this to someone on a one-on-one basis, this could be someone that I'm talking to, like at a party, or it could be someone who's in my office who mentions that they've had dry needling before, or, anyone else, right? But just in a one-to-one conversation, every time I explain this, people say, yikes. Like I have a friend who was also a patient who is a critical care surgeon, and even she did not realize that dry needling had so little training, and she herself had it done, right? So even educated within the realm of medicine, people don't have all the information here. So that to me is the importance of talking about this. It's not to hate on physical therapists or chiropractors or anyone else who might be using this modality. I will get into later why I don't think it's a good practice in general. It's not a good practice of medicine. However, I can respect that everyone practices differently, and we can agree to disagree about what the best way to practice is. Mostly what I want to talk about today and really highlight is the difference in safety precautions. Dry needling is really a situation where people do not understand how risky it is for such little benefit. Okay, so let's get into it. Dry needling, in case you are not familiar, is the use of acupuncture needles deeply into muscles with the thought that this creates some sort of trauma to the muscle, breaks up the adhesion, and then relaxes the muscle and promotes recovery in some form or fashion. This is a technique in acupuncture school loosely that is called trigger point needling. In my program, in my last semester of school, in a microsystems class, we learned trigger point needling in about 10 minutes. It was at that point in our education where we had done 2 years of clinical rotations, meaning where we are treating the patient with supervision, following many semesters of in-class supervised learning how to needle, our teacher showed us how we needle in this way. This can vary from school to school, from teacher to teacher, and obviously acupuncturists and physical therapists, chiropractors, any practitioner is going to have their own way of treating. Certainly this is normal, but how I was taught was that you needle deeply into the muscle, but generally speaking, it's going to be transverse needling. Now, what this means, you guys are not medical practitioners, this is sort of like parallel to the top of the skin. We're not going really deep toward the inside of the body because it's dangerous. And it depends what area of the body as to how dangerous it is. There are plenty of times where, as an acupuncturist, we will needle perpendicular into the body, straight into the center of the body, if you will. And this is not dangerous in most places on the body. But if we're talking about around the chest, the neck, the shoulders, we obviously know that the lungs are living, breathing organs underneath the surface. And so we don't ever needle perpendicular in that way. So something that is really common within the dry needling realm is that people say, gosh, like I have these tight traps all the time. Like I'm an athlete, whether professional or amateur or recreational, or I have this job that is very stressful, and maybe I'm a dentist and I'm looking down all day in people's mouths and my neck just gets so tight. So people seek physical therapy for these problems, which is normal and natural. There's nothing wrong with that. But then a physical therapist says, oh, I have a great thing for that. Like I've read in the literature and I took this weekend course. We can do dry needling for that. We'll break up the adhesion in the muscle or whatever other Western medical reasonings and rationale there is for using dry needling, and then it will heal and you'll feel better. That, as I mentioned before, is not an area of the body that we would ever want to needle deeply in that way. If we are needling the neck, the chest, the shoulders, the traps, anywhere. I'm moving my hands around. So you guys that are listening to the podcast and not watching on YouTube, I'm moving my hands around my chest and my neck and my shoulders and all that, just to say, think about this cavity, this region of the body. The lungs are underneath there. And when we're alive, they are moving and breathing. And no one is getting acupuncture or dry needling when they're dead. The reason that I mention that is because many physical therapy schools have cadaver labs, and they take anatomy classes where they work on cadavers. And that's amazing. That's so awesome. That is very, very rare in acupuncture school. I think I've heard maybe one program that does this. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessary in acupuncture school, but my point being, it is a very different ballgame to learn about the body when the body is not living versus learning about the body while the body is alive. The lungs are doing what they naturally do, and they are going to move within this cavity. Again, I'm like putting my hands in front of my chest as I talk about this, but I know most of you are listening to the podcast, so you can't see me. But the lungs are naturally moving, so we need to think about that when we put a needle in. Now, does this mean that I don't needle over the chest, neck, shoulders, back? Absolutely not. I do this all the time. It's the technique with which I do it. I never once am thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like, am I going to hurt someone? Am I going to collapse someone's lung? This is what we're worried about when people are dry needling in this area, because it's a very aggressive technique. It's a deep technique. And someone who is dry needling typically has very, very small amount of training. And so they truly do not have the experience to do this responsibly. I know that they don't think that. I'm not saying that a physical therapist says, oh yeah, I just don't care about my patients and I'm just going to do this. Please don't twist my words. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a case of not realizing how little you know and how little experience you have. And I think also as a broader profession, it's a case of not realizing that and then having a lot of power and money and lobbying state medical organizations and saying we should have the legal right to do this with our patients, despite the fact that the same state requires 3 to 4 years of school for an acupuncturist, also board exams, also far more clinical hours than PTs would ever consider doing for just using dry needling. So there's again, like a huge information asymmetry here, not only from people who are doing acupuncture, who are practicing acupuncture and the public, people who are doing dry needling and the public, but also when we see organizations lobbying the states. The state is not understanding and not seeing the comparison. You're telling me that a person who has a physical therapy degree, has had no training in school, can take a weekend course in dry needling and can go into their clinics and not only do this, but they can also bill insurance for it. And that's okay. But I, on the other hand, went to school for 4 years. I did 2 years of clinical rotations, meaning I was practicing in a clinic. Prior to that, we are also doing in-class hours, understanding needling angles, needling depths, locations. We are being supervised by licensed acupuncturists. We're practicing on ourselves in the presence of a supervisor. We're also practicing on each other. And all of this comes 2 years before starting the clinic. Now, acupuncture schools do vary in how they set up their school. Not all school is 4 years. Not all school has as many hours as mine did. I'm just speaking about my experience, but I have close to 1,000 hours of clinical experience before I even graduated, before I got licensed. And in addition to that, I was taking classes outside of school while I was going to school. So the difference is quite stark in our understanding of what the risks are. And then also just, again, the experience. When you have been around it so little, like someone who is doing dry needling, who's not an acupuncturist, you really just cannot wrap your mind around what the risk is and how much experience you really do need before you work on an actual living human. So the second part that I want to get into today, just so that you have a perspective of the differences in dry needling and the actual practice of Chinese medicine, of which acupuncture is one part. There are principles that drive Chinese medicine. As I mentioned before, random controlled trials are the gold standard in allopathic medicine. And there's nothing wrong with this per se, but it's just different when you get into Chinese medicine. And Chinese medicine is an entire system that is complete on its own. Acupuncture is one way that you can apply the principles of Chinese medicine, and it requires an understanding of Chinese medicine physiology. So when I am putting a needle in someone, I am not at all thinking about the tight muscle fiber. Even if someone comes to me and says, man, my traps are tight, my back's tight, I always have this tightness in this low back, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. That's not what I'm thinking about. What I'm thinking about is the Chinese medicine physiology that tells me blood nourishes muscles, the fascia, the connective tissue. Think of this like oil in a car. If you run out of oil in your car, your engine is going to get hot and it's going to get smoky, right? You're going to find yourself on the side of the road, most likely. This is kind of how we think about blood and how it relates to muscles in Chinese medicine. So that is a deeper issue than just putting a needle in a muscle and forcing it to relax. Forcing it to relax means that you are forcing it to do something that it can't actually do on its own. As opposed to if somebody comes in and they have tight muscles, number one, in the office, we're always taking the pulse. We're feeling what is going on with the organ system, with the channel system. Are the organs talking to each other? What resources are there in good shape? What resources need support? And again, we're coming back to the theory that blood is what we need to take care of our muscles and a lot of other things. But just for this example, the treatment would be focused on building blood. So we are literally using the concepts of Chinese medicine. We are applying them with needles. We could apply this with diet. We could apply this with Qigong. We could apply this with intention. I also offer remote treatments. So I treat people anywhere in the world. Obviously, I'm not using a needle at all. It is completely 100% energy medicine, which acupuncture is also. When we're using the needles, we're just focusing our attention. I don't want to go off the rails here, but the point is that dry needling is really like taking a bulldozer and shoving something forward to release that muscle. It's not addressing the underlying cause of why the muscle is tight. And so it's just a very poor practice. And quite honestly, this is like a sorry, not sorry moment, but I'm flabbergasted to see that actual licensed acupuncturists are resorting to using dry needling in their clinics. I think that this is a terrible sign of the state of acupuncture education in this country. And if you are a licensed acupuncturist and you need to resort to dry needling, please, 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 like reach out to me, to other colleagues. There are amazing teachers in this space that can help you develop your skills and your understanding so that you don't have to resort to something like dry needling that really doesn't offer the patient much at all. Now, it will possibly make the patient feel better today, and then next week they keep coming back to you. So if you're in the business of building a practice, in quotes, and you want to develop patients that need you forever, that's a great way to do it because the patient is not going to get better by you dry needling them. But if you are actually in the business of healing, helping people heal, you need to be looking at what is the underlying cause for the problem that the patient has. And the answer is never going to be dry needling. So alternatively, or similarly, if you are a patient and you're looking for a weekly appointment for the rest of your life, by all means, continue getting dry needling from your physical therapist, from your chiropractor, from your acupuncturist, whatever it may be. But if you're really looking to address the underlying problem, the real cause of why you have the tight muscles, why you have the migraines, why you have the tight traps, whatever it may be, the answer is never going to lie in dry needling because dry needling misses all of the concepts of Chinese medicine. It is simply just bulldozing to relax that muscle. So that's great. You get immediate relief. You could also maybe get immediate relief if you did like a line of Coke, or maybe if you like drank a bottle of vodka or anything else that is actually not healthy for you, but might give you relief in the moment. Are we looking for long-term solution or are we looking for a short-term solution? And also, even with that short-term solution, again, I've said this before, but we need to think about whether it's like a helpful Band-Aid or whether it's literally burying the problem and making it worse. I think dry needling is a concern not just for the safety factor, but it's also not addressing the cause of the problem that people come in with. And it could be making it worse if we are driving the problem deeper into the body. So when we get that short-term benefit, are we creating a long-term problem? And that is something that is not being talked about within the dry needling space, because most people who are using dry needling, whether you're a physical therapist, a chiropractor, a massage therapist, or quite frankly, even an acupuncturist, if you are using dry needling, you have missed the point that the problem is not on the surface. And if the problem is on the surface, in classical Chinese medicine, what we call this is the sinew channels. And those channels are not needled deeply. They are needled very shallowly. In fact, sometimes all I do for these channels is put one needle in the end of the channel. It's the exit point. If you're an acupuncturist or familiar, it's called the Jing Well. We put that in there. I will gua sha the channel. Gua sha is scraping, and I mean this lightly. This is not rough. It doesn't have to be rough. It moves the energy out and people regain their range of motion. Their pain goes away. This is a completely different way of treating, but it's a way of treating that respects Chinese medicine and the levels of energy and the physiology behind it. And I think that if you're going to use an acupuncture needle, you really need to be basing the treatments on Chinese medicine principles, because that is the tool that you've chosen to use. I'm not saying everyone should use acupuncture needles. In fact, I don't think they should. But if you are, I think you need to be respectful of that tool and of what that tool is and can do in the body. So just to reiterate and wrap that up, there is a drastic difference between someone using dry needling and someone using actual Chinese medicine and acupuncture as a tool of Chinese medicine. I could do a whole nother episode on where I think schools are coming up short, and there is a lot to say about that. But even still, if you want acupuncture, go to an acupuncturist. I wrote a blog post years ago, literally probably 10 years ago, called "If You Wanted a Haircut, You Wouldn't Go to a Butcher." A butcher uses cutting tools, right? So does a hairstylist. Are the two things the same? Of course not, because they're drastically different skills. A butcher is cutting raw meat. It doesn't have to be cut precisely in most cases. Don't come at me if you're a butcher and you know all the details of butchering. I don't. And of course, there's precision involved with fish, with different meats. Okay, but the point is, it is not the same skill that you need to cut meat that you need to cut hair. And we need to start putting this idea into the ethers, into the culture, so that people understand that not only is someone doing dry needling extremely, extremely undertrained, but also it's not even the same thing. And I will continue practicing Chinese medicine based on the principle because I think it's the right thing to do. It gets long-term benefit for patients that doesn't cause short-term or long-term harm. I don't risk my patients' lives or their long-term health. A collapsed lung is a tremendous injury. Yes, people recover from it, but some people don't, and they have long-lasting problems because of it. So it's just not something that we need to risk, and we need more people to know about the risk of dry needling so that they don't elect it, especially with someone who is so lightly trained as a physical therapist or a chiropractor. I welcome anyone who wants to go to acupuncture school to do so. The more the merrier. So if you're a physical therapist, chiropractor, massage therapist, listening to this episode, if you've been interested in acupuncture, there are so many ways that you can learn a deeper practice that will benefit your patients and yourself, quite frankly. Like, it will just open up things that you never thought of before. And I think that you'll be really pleased that you went into that arena of training. And we really do welcome you. I think all acupuncturists feel this way. If you want to come to acupuncture school, we welcome you with open arms. In fact, that has been the case in many, many classes that I've taken outside of school. There are always chiropractors that come and study with us because they want to know more than what they learned in school. Maybe they were dabbling in dry needling, who knows? But we are a welcoming group of people. We really do want more people to know and practice Chinese medicine, including lay people. Please feel welcome. There are avenues in which you can learn real acupuncture. It's not necessary to use dry needling in your practice, and it's way too risky. So just to recap, here I really wanted to talk about the difference in education between acupuncturists and people who are using dry needling, as well as the differences in the way we practice medicine. And if you found this episode helpful, if you learned something, please rate and share. I really appreciate you being here.